Hey there, welcome back to the At Home Dive YouTube channel. As always, my name is Joey, and today we're in the kitchen making something fantastic. Another classic beef stew. Because it's perfect for any cooler evening or anytime you get your friends or family together and you just want to give everyone a nice hearty meal that they can enjoy and smile around. So sit back, hit that subscribe button, let's dive right in. So on the counter today, we got a pretty simple list of ingredients, and all these are going to be things that we're all very familiar with. So let's start with the heart of the show. I've got 2 pounds of beef chuck roast. I will be cutting this in 1-inch cubes here in just a moment, and we're going to coat it with 4 tablespoons of flour, 1.5 tablespoons of finely ground black pepper, and 2 tablespoons of table salt. This is not like the coarse pepper or salt that I usually use. These are going to be really fine so that they go into the flour well and help coat the beef nice and evenly. I've also got 4 cloves of garlic, 1 medium sweet onion, 3 carrots, 3 stalks of celery. I'm going to be using about a 1/4 cup of tomato paste, 1 pound of potatoes. You can use whichever potatoes you'd like. I just happen to have these small ones at home, so I'm probably going to cut these into halves or maybe thirds depending on the size of these. But if you're going to use a large potato, just feel free to dice it up or put it in big chunks. I've got 8 ounces of mushrooms. These are optional, but I do love mushrooms, so I'm going to go ahead and throw these in. 1 bay leaf, 3 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. I've got 1.5 cups of red wine. If you're going to use red wine in this recipe, use something decent, something that you would drink, but it is also completely optional. You can also replace that with additional beef stock. Since I'm using 1.5 cups of red wine, I'm going to use 5.5 cups of beef stock. If you skip the red wine, feel free to jump straight to about 7 cups of beef stock in total. So these are the things that we're really going to need here, aside from the oil for sauteing, so let's get started. I'm going to start by consolidating my liquids and getting these out of the way, then mixing my flour, salt, and pepper into a large bowl so that I can coat the beef with it here in just a moment. Then I'm going to go ahead and cut up the vegetables and then the beef. With all of our vegetables and mushrooms and such cut up, we can move on to the beef. So if you notice, this beef is about 2 inches thick, and I'm really wanting about 1-inch cubes. So I'm gonna start by cutting it down the middle, just so it's easier to handle. And then I can split this into about a 1-inch slice. From there, I can have a little bit more ease making my 1-inch cubes. These also don't have to be perfect. As long as you get close, something like that, you're great. With our beef cubed up and our flour and seasoning mixed in, we can go ahead and bring the beef back and just coat it right into the flour. We're gonna do this by tossing it around and just getting all the flour stuck to the beef. It's not gonna be a lot, it's not gonna be breaded like you would if you were gonna deep fry it, but it's just basically gonna give it a nice little crust whenever we cook it off. Now let's go to the stove. So on the stove, I've got a large pot with a heavy bottom and a lid that fits it. I'm gonna go ahead and add in about 2 tablespoons of oil and wait for it to get nice and hot, and then we're gonna go ahead and slowly add in this beef. We have the pot and this beef is sizzling quite nicely. I'm gonna wait for this to brown. As you can see, I tried to spread this around to where it's not stacked as much, sitting on top of each other, but more all getting good pan contact and waiting for it to all get nice color on it. So we're not gonna rush this. We are gonna let this cook a little bit, and then we'll mix it around and stir it so that we get good color on all sides, if possible. So now that our beef's got nice and brown on most sides, I'm gonna go and grab it and just throw it right back into the bowl that we breaded it in. And from there, we're gonna move on to doing the veggies. I'm gonna go ahead and add in about another tablespoon of oil. That way the veggies have something to get them going, and then we're gonna add these back in. The veggies will take a few minutes to cook, but keep in mind that you don't have to cook them all the way. You just wanna start to soften them up. So whenever they start to become translucent or soften up the slightest bit, then we can move on to the next step. In the meantime, if there are any thick pieces on the bottom of the pot, feel free to see if they'll scrape off. As you can see here, all of our veggies have begun to sweat out a lot of their moisture, and they're starting to become very fragrant and really bring the smell of this kitchen to a fantastic place. And so the fond is starting to lift off the bottom of the pot, and now it's time to move on to the tomato paste. I'm gonna go right out of the tube here, and I'm looking for about a 1/4 cup or 2 ounces. And the more you add, it's gonna be just fine. It just will determine the thickness that you end up with in your stew. And that's more than fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this stir in. And as you can see here, it will immediately begin to start to color and stick to the bottom of the pot. So this is one of those stages where you do not wanna walk away or leave this unattended for a little while. I'm gonna let this take a little bit of color and then grab my liquid as we start to form the stew. The tomato paste is really starting to darken up all over the place, but we're also starting to form this thicker fond on the bottom of the pot as opposed to it lifting off. So that lets us know that we're about ready for our liquid because these are all starting to caramelize all these sugars. So as you can see here, we have this as being the darker part. Let's go ahead and start adding in a little bit of liquid right here, and we're gonna try to lift most of that off the pot before we get too carried away with getting everything else added in. As you can see, a lot of it immediately lifts off, and that's fantastic because that means that we're not burning anything, that we're just taking good color all around. And this liquid, you can see, really starts to thicken up immediately. So that's gonna be one more thing that we need to keep an eye on because this is the base of our stew as we continue to build these layers of flavor. I'm gonna give this just a moment where I add in a little bit more liquid at a time and go through and try to get a lot more of this color lifted off the pot and get that flavor incorporated into the liquid as opposed to becoming burnt on the bottom. As you can see, whenever we reach in here, all of that color is gone from the bottom of the pot, and that lets us know that we are ready to go ahead and add back in all of our beef and the rest of our liquid. Now that we have all of our liquid in, we're gonna go ahead and let this simmer for about 30 minutes. But first, we're gonna add in the mushrooms and let them add to this wonderful flavor. Once this comes up to a simmer, you may wanna turn the heat down just a little bit because we're not trying to cook away the liquid. Now I'm gonna come back over to the counter while I wait and go ahead and mince this head of parsley. One bunch of parsley goes a long way and just brightens this up a little bit and lightens the flavor. As you can see here, I chopped the parsley up, but not super fine. I left it a little bit larger so it holds up to the nice, beefy, bold flavor. So let's go ahead and set this aside, and then we'll come on back and check on the stew. So back on the stove, you can see our beef stew is starting to look and smell fantastic. We're gonna let it cook for about 25 minutes or so because it has been simmering already for about 5 minutes. And you can see the color of the broth is getting deep and rich, and it's starting to even thicken up just a little bit, but not much. So let's let this continue to cook.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
We are back, and the beef has been simmering for about 35 minutes or so now. And so we're gonna take a look at it and give it a feel. So let's just grab one of our chunks of beef and see how tender it is. And as you can see, that starts to pull apart. So that lets us know that the beef is starting to tender up quite a bit. So it's time we go ahead and add in the potatoes. As you drop these in, if your potatoes are cut, just make sure they come apart because some of these potatoes, like this, may try to stick together due to the starches in the potatoes. I'm gonna give these potatoes just a little bit of a stir in, and now I'm gonna let this sit and simmer for about 15 more minutes or so and give them time to tenderize. We'll be back in just a moment.
One eternity later.
We are back, and we have let our potatoes simmer in here for about 15-20 minutes. Depending on the size of your potatoes, you may need a little longer or a little less, but basically you just want to make sure that your potatoes are starting to become fork tender. You don't want them falling apart, but you want to make sure that they're also not hard. Right now, our beef stew is pretty well finished. As long as everything's nice and soft, we are good to go. And as you can see, we've continued to develop that thickness from the potato starch coming into it. This looks fantastic to me. If by chance you want yours a little bit heartier and thicker, you always have that option. What you would do in that case is we're gonna grab just a little bit of cornstarch and just a little bit of water, and we're gonna mix these together until smooth. Once you've done that, it's gonna go right in, and we're gonna add this very slowly to our stew and see how much it thickens it up. We don't really wanna thicken it up too much, but if you want just a little bit more body to it, add in your cornstarch and then just give it a stir. And as soon as you reach the viscosity that you're looking for and you've adjusted the seasonings the way you'd like, we are ready to go. Once you've achieved the thickness and the seasoning that you like with your stew, go ahead and grab about half your parsley and throw it right in the mix. We're gonna go ahead and turn the heat off because we are done cooking, and just stir this parsley in. Let that fresh green herb flavor kind of go into the stew. And now your stew is completely finished. We'll see you on the countertop as we bowl this up to see what we think. So on the counter here, we have our beef stew, and the remaining parsley is just so we can give it one final pinch right over the top. And I love a good slice of bread with stew. So any fresh made bread you got will be absolutely fantastic. So let's go ahead and just take a look here. We have the thick, not too thick, but nice viscosity here. And we're gonna give this a taste and see if the beef is tender and how the flavor is. Guys, as I expect, this is ridiculously good. It's so rich and hearty. and it has that subtle sweetness from the red wine and the carrots and the nice soft potatoes, and the beef is nice and juicy and tender. This is delicious. All right, well, that wraps us up on how to make beef stew. Comment below and let me know how yours turns out, and comment and let me know if you like yours with mushrooms or not. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to subscribe. Have a great day.